So I guess I should start also by thanking, obviously, Jason and the Metropolitan Black Bar Association, the Misley Center for hosting us. I think that these sorts of gatherings are crucially important, especially during this time. A lot of our communities are uncertain, right? It's not just those who are affected, but those who are not are uncertain about these times and what they mean going forward. And so I think it's really important to have opportunities to sit with your community and discuss questions and concerns and share information. And so that's what we'll do today. Again, my name is Tiffany Wheatland, and I'm here from the New York Immigration Coalition, where I serve as Manager of Community Outreach, Community Engagement. And this is what we do. We do a lot of community discussions, particularly since January and since the inauguration of Donald Trump. We've been going around throughout the 5 boroughs. We also have a regional team that works regionally to bring information to the community about what their rights are with respect to immigration, where they can go for assistance and services. And I think that, there are a lot of questions, right? A lot of questions that we can answer and a lot that we can't at this time. I want to talk to you a little bit today about the packet that I shared. Everyone should have a copy of this. If you don't, let me know. This is a community toolkit that we're circulating that has quite a bit of information about various resources: health, education rights, strategies for engaging with ICE, how to report hate crimes, where to go to report fraud, and then some hotline information that you can consult in case of the need for legal assistance. So folks who need immigration attorneys that are struggling to find legitimate, competent attorneys. So I'm going to quickly go through the toolkit so that those of you who are, I'd say, advocates or people that are allies, right, that are maybe not affected yourselves but are looking to support your community and maybe friends or family that may be, that you can use this information to best assist them. So the first page talks a bit about, a lot of what we already know. What happened in January with the election of Donald Trump, how we can expect some things to change, right? So information about how to plan for the changes that will affect possibly yourself or your community members. We included a bit of information about DACA, just to sort of reassure people that as of now, this program still stands. Anyone with DACA should continue to exercise the rights that they have under this program. As it stands, as of today, we haven't received any additional guidance about this program, so this is where we're at, right? The program remains, and if you have questions about applying for other forms of immigration relief, you should absolutely be consulting with an attorney now about that. With respect to education, I think that this is something that is of particular concern, right, for those of us with children or those of us working within the school systems. Just those of us concerned about the next generation. What are our rights with respect to education? And I think the most important thing to remember is that particular in New York City, earlier we had a member of the mayor's office here to speak about the city resources made available to New Yorkers. Education is a right afforded to all, regardless or irrespective of immigration status. What does that mean? That means that we all have the right to send our children to school. It means that the school authorities should not be asking about your child's immigration status. It's illegal. If that's happening to you, you should definitely be reporting that. That if you need English language assistance, that is also a right that you have, something that should be afforded to you. And so you should feel free to exercise those rights and request that sort of assistance in whatever language you speak. What we found is that some parents have been less inclined to participate in their child's education, whether it's to participate in PTA meetings, right, or to meet with teachers because of language barriers, right? And this is appalling because we know that it's important that a parent is active in their child's education. So it's important to remember that if English is not your first language, you have the right to go to your school administrator and say, I would like interpretation in X language. And that's something that they need to try and make accommodations for. And that's, again, irrespective of your child's immigration status and your immigration status. And I know, at this time it's easy to say, but there is still a lot of fear in communities about, well, if I'm undocumented and I go to visit my child at school, or I try to set up an appointment with a principal or teacher, are there ramifications there? Might I be asked about my immigration status? And again, the answer is no, that the school does not have the right to inquire about one's immigration status. I want to talk just a little bit about health, which is particularly of concern in this moment. Those of us who have been watching the news closely would have been aware or are aware about the current efforts of the Republican Party to really gut the ACA, the Affordable Health Care Plan, so-called Obamacare, to completely do away with it and replace it with something far less favorable to our communities. We have at the Coalition a health collaborative that is working round the clock to push advocacy, not just to preserve that plan, the Affordable Health Care Plan, but to really continue demanding that Congress do all that it can to protect this access to health care that Americans and all people who reside within our borders deserve. It's unfortunate, I think, that we've arrived at this juncture where we're having to demand, right, that people acknowledge that health care is a right. We've got politicians, we've got advocates, we've got members of the community coming up. We've had a number of press conferences in the last week. We've had people rallying, members of Congress sending letters, all kinds of things, to push something that is really apparent to most people, that you shouldn't have to spend $1 million on health care, right? You shouldn't have to mortgage a home for health care bills. These are things that in this country should be afforded to everyone. Right now, as it stands today in this moment, everyone still has the right to access the services through the Affordable Health Care Plan, to apply for coverage through the marketplace, to call a navigator to see what sorts of insurance you may qualify for. And again, this is still irrespective of immigration status. Now, that being said, I think it's important that we acknowledge that this is a critical moment. This day, today, the next several days through next week, as we know, this past Thursday, in the House of Representatives, a bill was passed, as I said a moment ago, to do away with a lot of the protections of this health care plan. Recently, a Senate version of this bill, just yesterday, has been introduced that's really, by all accounts, far worse than the House version, which is a little unimaginable, but that is in fact the case. And so we have advocates at the Coalition, a number of our members, that are rallying to send letters, to urge not just people in New York City, but people in a number of states where we need the representatives to really vote no on this plan. To call people in those states, right? So this is not just about rallying people in New York, this is about rallying people in states where these votes are really critical. And I have a list of them I can share afterwards if you're interested. But we need folks to really be involved. I received a message actually from members of our healthcare collaborative last night that provided a few details on what this plan seeks to do. And I'll just share a few of them with you now. Some of this you may already be aware of, but what the recent Senate bill essentially does is it would repeal all funding, and follow me closely, for private insurance. It would repeal funding for Medicaid coverage, something that I think most of us in this room know a lot of New Yorkers benefit from. Okay, this is the program that covers people that are low income. Repeal of a variety of taxes on healthcare companies and high income individual households. Repeal enforcement of mandates on individuals and employers to maintain insurance, essentially meaning no one is any longer required to have insurance, right? So it means that now people are actually going to be compelled to apply for insurance when they're sick, right? Which, as we know, is a problem not just for the market, right, but for society. To put people in a position where they don't think they can afford insurance, and so they're waiting until they're at their worst to even apply for it. The plan would eliminate funding for Planned Parenthood. Again, a very crucial program. We're talking about coverage for women, important, vital reproductive health care, and a whole host of other things that are really just egregious. And so I think that, one, we need to continue advocating around this, but two, people just need to know. If you don't know, if you're not aware, you should take the time to secure a copy of the bill, take a look at it, and understand how it will affect your community. It's planning to throw hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people off of coverage, including particularly low-income people and people with disabilities. So this is something that is really, I think, it's just a disaster. I think there's no other way to put it. So that's one thing that we're working on. Like I said, in this moment, I think it's important that people remember, and hopefully this will remain the case beyond next week, depending on what happens with this bill, that everyone can access health care regardless of immigration status. And people should be encouraged to call the exchange and see what kinds of programs they qualify for. One important question, and so if people are following along with me in the packet, I'm on the page that has this nice colorful flyer on ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, is that particularly now, right, with the expanded, I call them expanded enforcement, but in many ways, these are the lack now of priorities, meaning that the administration has determined that anyone here without status is now subject to deportation. And this includes people who maybe overstayed a visa, anyone who doesn't have immigration status that would cover them from deportation is at risk. Again, we know that particularly this administration campaigned right on a platform that said we are going to make sure that we keep certain people out of this country, to try to otherize immigrants, to try to otherwise people that have called this country home, that have been taxpayers, that have been really, I think, integral to communities across the nation, simply because of something as arbitrary, I would call it, as immigration status. I think if we all understand the principles of this nation, they are that of inclusivity, or they should be. And these are principles that we preach, but that we don't have the best track record of really adhering to. So I think when we talk about how people can protect themselves in this moment, we're talking about protecting ourselves from ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, from the NYPD, right? And a series of law enforcement apparatus that seek to criminalize our communities. So I'm going to talk to us a little bit about how we engage with ICE. Very simple, and I think those of you that know people who may be directly impacted, and when I say that I mean people that are here without status, even people that are here with sorts of immigration status, green card holders that have certain prior criminal convictions, should be aware of the risks that they may face for deportation. So, you know, the flyer is very simple, and it gives you some very straightforward suggestions, right? Should you have to interface with ICE, so for example, should they come to your home, something that you can share with people that you know that may be at risk, don't open the door, right? This is not the Midwest, Iowa, United States, where people leave their doors unlocked, they don't even ask who it is at the door, you know, anyone is allowed in. This is New York City, right? And it goes without saying that I think it's prudent to always, one, be mindful of who's entering your home, but two, to make sure that you're there to give authority for someone to come in. What we found is that ICE is visiting the homes of people, right? They collect information a number of different ways about who they wish to apprehend. They take this information, they go and seek out the individual. Oftentimes, they come without any sort of documentation, the needed documentation that they need to actually detain someone. Everyone should know, what does ICE need to make an arrest? What do they actually need to enter your home? A warrant for your arrest. Okay? If they don't have that warrant, they don't have the right to be there. Now, does that mean that they will simply walk away? Of course not. Their job is to apprehend, detain, and deport people. This is what they're paid to do. What immigrants can do, and what we're encouraging, folks to do to protect themselves, is not only are you asking the person at your door to identify themselves, yes, I'm ICE. Sometimes they say they'll identify themselves as federal police. You want to ask them to provide the documentation they're required to provide. Do you have a warrant? Okay, if they don't, right, then that's the end of the conversation. But oftentimes, I think that the major concern is, these are federal authorities. And I think every one of us in this room can agree that you walk down the street and you have an interaction with NYPD, you might become a little frazzled, right? You might feel a bit intimidated. It's no different, right, with ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So I think in order to really, in a moment of uncertainty, in a moment of fear, to best protect yourself, the best and most prudent information or guidance is to not open the door, to refuse entry at all costs. And I say that because even if they have a warrant, right, the warrant really allows them and affords them the right to come to your home, right, and typically to search if that's what the warrant indicates. If they don't have that, then you're under no obligation to allow them in. If they have the warrant, if they have the proper documentation, they will come in, right? They will come in by force, they will do what they have to do. So if, for example, I'm an individual, I have a language barrier. English is not my first language. Maybe I don't even know what the warrant says. I don't know what a warrant looks like. I've never seen one. The best thing for me to do for both myself and my family is to tell that agent, I don't wish to answer your questions. I will not allow you to come into my home. I wish to speak to my attorney, right? All of this you say, obviously, through the door, okay? Because what happens is once you allow this official to come into your home, right, and begin asking questions, they're then able to make what we call collateral arrest, right? So maybe they came looking for Joe Schmo. They come into the home, they see there are several other people sitting on the couch, you know, there are children there, there are other folks there. They may decide to question other people in the home as well and determine, you know, I'm not sure about your immigration status. Why don't you come down to the station with me as well? So to avoid all of that, right, and particularly in the case of folks that may have language barriers or literacy barriers, right, maybe you can't read and write, you wouldn't know what the warrant said even if they presented it to you. The best course of action is to refuse to open the door. Other steps, always make sure that you announce in whatever language you speak that you don't consent to the search, and that obviously you wish to remain silent, right, and not answer any questions until you speak with an attorney. Everyone should have received these cards that I passed out, these small, handy, wallet-sized Know Your Rights cards. They might seem a little silly, right, but these are actually really important. Again, going back to this idea of having language barriers, all kinds of things, in the moment where I'm so fearful, I don't know what to say. I don't need to say anything. I can simply present this card to the official and exercise that right, right? Now, it's more or less the same should you meet ICE, right, in the streets, in other public places, at a workplace, right? We know that they are often engaged in workplace raids, or they're trying to apprehend people in various public locations. Always exercise those rights to remain silent and not give information, to speak to an attorney. Don't sign anything. Sometimes they're presenting documents that would allow you to, or that would compel you to waive your rights, and we don't want to do that. I think the other thing to keep in mind is if you are someone who is undocumented or out of status, it's important that you consult with an immigration attorney immediately. This is the one most important thing you can do for yourself, to find out what other forms of relief you may qualify for. In addition to that, having consulted with an immigration attorney would afford you that opportunity to meet with someone who now is at least mildly familiar with your case, that you can call on in the case you're detained, right? We've been hearing stories of late, all in the news, right, of people being detained, taken to a detention facility, people not knowing where they are, how to reach them. If I'm an immigrant and I'm detained, I need to have the phone number of an immigration attorney I can call on speed dial, right, and consult with and let them know, this is my situation, I've been detained, right, what can you do for me? Even if I haven't retained the services of that individual. So, as I said, a lot of this information is easy to access, right? We have these packets on our website, so if you have folks that obviously are not here today, but you'd like to share that information with, you can feel free to reach out to me, and I can send you electronic copies. I just want to touch on a few more things before I get to the advocacy piece of the conversation. IDP, the Immigrant Defense Project, is a phenomenal organization that's assisting folks, all immigrants, but their specialty is really assisting people that have prior criminal convictions. Okay, sometimes you'll find that certain attorneys are not capable of competently handling cases of people that have had contact with the criminal justice system. the earlier panel, there was some discussion about the implications of having criminal contact for immigrants, right, which are very different than they are for citizens, for U.S. citizens. So it's important that immigrants of all status understand what their risks are when they have contact with the criminal justice system. So again, for folks that may have concerns about that, if you've ever had any contacts or know anyone who has, they should definitely reach out to the Immigrant Defense Project to arrange a consultation and to find out what forms of relief they qualify for and how best they can be assisted. I'm going to jump ahead just to quickly make a statement about hate crimes. This is something that I think that many of us are fearful is happening on a much higher rate, but is not being reported for obvious reasons. Folks are fearful of reporting not only when they're victimized by crime, but right, when they witness crime, because they are not sure what the implications will be for them. So we want to remind people that it's important, it's critically important that if you are ever victimized, and you think it's because of your race, your religion, your sexual orientation, etc., that you reach out, one, to the police, always as a first level of reporting, to call the police, call 911, but also you can call the governor's hotline, the attorney general we spoke about earlier. I want to just shout out two district attorney's offices, that of the Bronx, Darcel Clark's office, and that of, I still refer to it as the late Ken Thompson, but the Brooklyn district attorney's office that's doing really amazing work in making sure that they are taking on these cases. Every panel I go to, almost every panel except for this one, we have a representative there, and they're talking about the work that they're doing to really make sure that people who perpetrate fraud crimes against immigrants are, that those cases are investigated and that they're brought to justice. And so I think that's really one of the top priorities of the work that we're doing, is trying to make sure that everyone knows, if you've ever been a victim of fraud in particular, that you report it, right? Because it will be investigated, and that these people are taken off the streets. Some of you may know the recent decisions on temporary protected status for not just the West Africans who lost it back in May, those from Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, but most recently for Haitians, right? That was extended 6 months, but is due to end more than likely in January. And it was very devastating actually for many of us to get this news. And we'll continue fighting for a full 18-month extension, as we all know as advocates that the conditions on the ground in Haiti warrant an 18-month extension. But I raise this for a couple of reasons. One, this time in particular, not just because I think of the administration of Donald Trump, but because of this just anti-immigrant sentiment in general. And because of the uncertainty that the policies of Trump have created, that people aren't really sure, is it safe to apply for TPS, right? Will TPS expire and will I be out of status? Can I apply for something else? There are a lot of people, I think record numbers of people that are falling victim to fraudulent notarios, to attorneys that say they're attorneys and they're really not, or they're just not competent. And so it's a major issue for this city. And not just for the city, I'm sure it's happening all across the state. And so the one thing I think we really want to encourage people to do is to make sure that whatever attorney they choose to receive services from, that they make sure that that person or that firm is BIA accredited, that obviously they are following the guidelines of the law as they should, and there's some information here about how to determine if your attorney is actually doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? And if they're not, that you're reporting that, right? And making sure that you get a second opinion, because one of the worst consequences of having immigration paperwork filed by someone who's not an attorney or doesn't know what they're doing is that could possibly land you in deportation proceedings, depending on that outcome, right? And so it's not just about the fact that people being defrauded of their money, their hard-earned money, but that people are having their cases not resolved in the attainment of an immigration benefit, but in deportation proceedings. And so this is really something I think we all need to be aware of and need to be diligent about educating each other about. One of the last things I'll speak about is, in addition to fraud, right, which is, like I said, number one. ICE is number two, fraud is number one. We have been, unfortunately, having to have this difficult discussion about making a plan for your family, right? And this is something that I think some of us are not yet ready to reconcile ourselves with or to really think about, but it's important because we know that people are being deported. They're being detained for lengthy periods, and they're being ultimately deported. And so what can we do in this moment to protect ourselves, our families, our communities? Making a plan, I think the first thing, and I mentioned this in the very beginning of my presentation, is about knowing what your status is, your level of risk for deportation, and ensuring that you've consulted, maybe not once, maybe twice, right, with immigration attorneys to determine what other forms of relief you might qualify for, right? How else can you adjust your status to allow you to live lawfully within the United States? The earlier panel presentation, again, the mayor's office mentioned the ID NYC program, okay? And this is something I just want to reiterate because we're seeing that people are walking around with passports, with consular ID cards, with identification that is not only problematic to carry for a number of reasons, but can actually assist ICE in making, in detaining you, right, should you be stopped. So if I'm walking down the street with my passport, I'm stopped by NYPD, not NYPD, excuse me, ICE, and asked to show my identification, obviously, what is the problem with me showing a passport? Okay. The most obvious reason is that it will disclose not only that I'm not from the United States, but where I'm from, right? And so this is a problem. You never want to walk around with any documentation that discloses your immigration status, right, or that you're not a U.S. citizen because you've made it easier, right, for the ICE agent to make a case to detain you. So we also encourage people to walk with their ID NYC card, right, because it's a way, at least people within New York City, right, a way that you can lawfully carry identification, but in a way that will protect you, right? In the event that someone you know is detained, it's important that you know their A number, we call it the alien registration number, so that you can locate them to find out whether or not they've been detained, if they're immigration detention, where they might be. So all of this information is in this Make a Plan flyer. There are other things that people might want to consider, like maybe speaking to an attorney about completing a special power of attorney, child care forms that would give someone temporary authority to essentially have custody, but to care for your children in the event that you're detained or even deported. Okay, and that's something, that particular form is it's a legal form, but it's something that you don't have to go to the courthouse to complete. You could have someone, an immigration navigator even, assist you to complete that form. In terms of immigration referrals, let me say, to competent attorneys, we have been recommending people to the ONA hotline, the Office of New Americans. I always encourage people to reach out to the NYIC directly, to the coalition, because we have a way of also referring folks or making those connections a bit easier. But I think one of the most important things that people can do is really have information to one, like I said, know what they qualify for, but just to have the number of an attorney who they can reach out to in case of need. I wanted to talk just a little bit, and I hope I'm not over time, about the importance of being involved in advocacy, and this is just not for people who are experiencing the immigration system as it stands, but for advocates, for what I like to call ambassadors, for people who are working in the community to support these communities. It's really important that I think we're all, one, civically engaged, but that we're all informed about what's happening around us. A lot of the policies that have been passed in Washington have been passed right under our noses, right? And these are long-standing policies. A lot of these have been in the making for some time. The Republicans didn't get up, yesterday, last week, and decide we want to repeal Obamacare. They've been thinking about this for some time, right? And so I think it's important that we stay engaged and we continue to hold our electeds accountable. I wanted to acknowledge Borough President Gail Brewer, who's here. I'm so glad she joined us. Often we have these forums, and you'll have electeds come and say a few nice words, I think what really matters is to see those who are doing the work, who are showing and demonstrating that commitment by being on the right side of policy. Our communities are in trouble right now. They're in real trouble. And I think that in addition to being informed, it's important that we take action. Right? The first step is to know the various ways in which your communities are being disenfranchised. But I think on top of that, we can't be afraid to step out, and particularly on behalf of those who don't have a voice to do so. We've been pushing for things like the right for all of us to vote, right? Immigrants of various status to vote as well in municipal elections. So many different pieces of legislation that would make this city in particular much more inclusive. And we can't do that, with a handful of advocates, right, at every press conference. We need to make sure that we have everyone on board, right? So I think I'll stop there, and maybe we can take a couple of questions.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.
Great. So thank you, Tiffany. Let's see. So this would probably be a good time. So does anyone have any particular questions about, I guess, what you should do if you're stopped by an ICE agent or if they come by your home? I know Tiffany went through a lot of those things, but does anyone have anything they want some elaboration on?
Yeah, I just had a question. If you could explain a little better of the situation where someone is accosted on the street, and in fact they don't have status.
Right. So I think, if we were to walk through a scenario, right? I'm walking down the street, minding my own business, and I'm assuming, again, we're talking about the context of an ICE, right? So Immigration and Customs agent. And we know, again, the job of ICE is to apprehend, to detain, right, for deportation. This is what they do, and we need to understand that. There's no, well, if I explain to the ICE, official, I just recently fell out of status, we can negotiate, things will be okay. It doesn't work that way, right, because that is not what they're paid to do. The one thing to remember is you don't want to give information, right? Now, just like any other interaction with law enforcement, with an authority, you always want to be respectful, right? We have seen countless videos, heard countless accounts, read countless news reports of the ways in which people are brutalized by, particularly NYPD, right? Or by, let's just say, police across this nation. And so we know that encounters with law enforcement are not easy. So we always remind people to be respectful, right? To try to be as respectful as you can. But to exercise your rights, right? To not speak with someone, not provide information about, one, your immigration status, or where you come from, right? So if I'm stopped, right, the officer may ask me to show identification. I would never want to show a passport, never want to show a consular ID. Maybe I provide my ID NYC, right? In New York City, as I understand it, I'm not even required to show ID. However, obviously, if you don't cooperate, what is the possible next action that the ICE officer will take? Well, I'll just take you down to the station and we can determine who you are there. So it's important that you kind of gauge in that moment, right? What is the best course of action to take? You can show an ID that doesn't disclose your immigration status, right? In good faith, you want to cooperate. But you never want to give information. You don't want to say, yes, I'm in status, or no, I'm not. One thing is, if you're a green card holder, right, you are required to carry your green card and to present that. That's one thing. But otherwise, you can say you passed in your Know Your Rights card, right, that says, I don't wish to answer your questions, I wish to speak to an attorney, right? That's a right that you have in the United States. And you should exercise that. You can tell them, and you should tell them verbally, that I don't consent to a search, right? Oftentimes they'll try and search you. Now, does it mean that they won't try and search you? No, certainly not. Okay, and we've heard plenty of accounts of both ICE and NYPD violating people's rights. But the importance of, one, verbalizing and affirming that right, that you do not consent to be, one, questioned, right, or to answer questions, but you also don't consent to be searched, is that should you later, is it determined that it's a unlawful stop, right, or that you can fight this, that will help your case. For you to be able to say that I actually affirmed my right, I asserted my right to not consent, and that right was violated.
Right. And I'm sorry, and then maybe just to jump in there, I think that's why it's so important nowadays that people try to record everything. If there's someone that's with you, if there's an encounter that's going on, I mean, that's a lot of times the best evidence you have. Because if, for example, you know, you say that you don't want to give them your information and then they proceed to try to search you, or there's an unlawful search, then if you have some actual recorded, documented evidence about that, that may be something that's helpful, you know, for your attorneys if you end up having to go through some type of proceeding. So that's one thing you want to keep in mind. The other thing I was thinking about as Tiffany was speaking is that you know, again, I mean, we're kind of talking about it through the day, but you really want to make sure that you're aware of different types of scams that are out there. And that's because when we're talking about IDs, I mean, one of the cases that we've been recently seeing over at the Attorney General's office is there are folks that are out there that are making fraudulent ID cards and saying, if you give this card to, let's say, an ICE agent, then they'll look at it and then you'll be allowed to walk away. I mean, that's ridiculous. You know, there's no card that's out there that can give you that type of information. But a lot of times, especially when there's a high level of, for one, misinformation, and then two, fear, then people, you know, are really willing and want to believe a lot of things that are out there. It makes us a little bit more susceptible. So, you know, I imagine, you know, some of these things, you know, we hear about and they may not be something that we think we may personally may not fall for, but we also know a lot of folks out there. I mean, these things happen, and there's a reason these businesses stem up, because there are people that are being victimized and taken advantage of this way. So again, it's good to have this information out there so that, you know, when we see these things, maybe we can help others as well, which goes to the advocacy part that Tiffany was talking about.
Yeah. And just to add, I mean, you know, the one thing we also always stress is you never want to lie to ICE officials. They will use that against you, right? So for example, if they come to your home and they're asking you about someone who lives there and you're telling them this person doesn't live there, you never want to do that. You always want to be honest. And that's why the best policy is just to not say anything, right? To not incriminate yourself or anyone else. The piece about recording is crucially important. I think, you know, again, you want to remember to be safe. Again, we've seen far too many instances of people attempting to record and being brutalized and whatnot, and people should not be afraid, right? They shouldn't use that and be afraid, but I think we just need to be mindful, right? We don't want people engaged in sudden moves and anything that could render them victim to police violence, which, you know, these days you can do just about anything and nothing to be a victim of police violence. But I think,
and I'm sorry, and then quickly just to jump in with that, I think what it is if you weren't obstructing justice, I mean, I think that's really the issue. So if there's an incident that's going on right here next to Tiffany, if I come, you know, right here with the camera, then there may be an argument that there's some type of obstruction of justice. But if you're at a reasonable distance and which you can be and get all the information, you know, then I think there's, you know, it's very clear that you're not you know, causing any problems in that type of way. So that's usually,
right,
you know, maybe if you're trying to gauge what you should do, or, you know, what the parameters are, you know, that's
right,
one way to do it.
Right. And if they're ever witnesses, right, other folks that are witnessing, you know, always encourage them to film what they see. And those are the kinds of things we speak about in the packet that you can share with IDP. They're tracking, you know, incidents of ICE raids. But yeah, these are the things that we can do, right? People shouldn't feel powerless. They should know that there are tools that they can use to protect themselves, but they should always do so safely. Any other questions or comments or experiences?
Great. All right, well, thank you very much, Tiffany. Being up here all by ourselves doing the whole thing, you know, with our group. And of course, you know, the organization she's worked is the New York Immigration Coalition, which does a lot of tremendous work. I know the Attorney General's office are part of the Protect the Immigrant New Yorkers task force, and one of the leaders, I guess, would be Camille, right? Camille Mackler, you know, who's you know, with who's one of the people that put us in contact. So anyway, the work that the New York Immigration Coalition does, I mean, they're definitely one of the people that are out there being advocates and champions for folks.